still kind of a black eye. Some of the on Biden calls himself the most pro-union president. He says that in almost every speech. And some of these labor unions are very upset with him, and also upset with the Democrats in Congress who have passed this. And Biden has just kind of said, well, I did the best I can. I got a contract that nobody else could give. That's what he said. And the big sticking point has been sick days. There's no sick days. There's no guaranteed sick days in the contract. And he said, well, I did the best I could on that. And I'll try to get that next time.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by White House reporter Haisten Willis. Haisten, President Biden, after a somewhat successful midterm election, not certainly the red wave that they were fearing, has begun to really tout his economic policies and say that the economic ship, to mangle a metaphor, is turning around. Is that accurate, and what is the president saying about the state of the economy right now?
Well, time will definitely tell on this, but Biden has gotten some good news in the last few days. GDP growth for the third quarter was revised up. Jobless claims are down, and inflation has come in. The most recent numbers for October are also slightly down. So he did a kind of a trio of good things, and of course, being the president, he's going to seize on that. He released a statement saying that that the economy was doing well, and that his plan was working, and this was a sign of his plan working. Now, the long term, of course, he doesn't really know, and neither does anyone else. The Federal Reserve, of course, has been aggressively hiking interest rates throughout this year. They're expected to do so again at their next meeting, and the long-term effects of that that takes a long time for this to be seen. So there's still a while before we're really going to feel the full impact of what happens there. There have been some major corporate layoffs that could signal the dreaded R word, a recession could be coming down the line, but it could be another 6 months before it happens. It is possible that it doesn't happen at all, so we just don't know. And if that does happen, though, of course, that's going to really imperil Biden. I spoke to an economist this morning that talked about this big truism, right? If the economy is doing well, the president gets credit, whether he really deserves that or not. If the economy is not doing well, then the president's going to get the blame. So we will see. One last thing was Republicans, of course, have definitely blamed Biden for high inflation, which we're definitely experiencing. They repeatedly point to the American Rescue Plan. It was a $2 trillion bill passed with only Democratic votes in March of 2021, just after Biden took office. They say that is responsible for very high inflation.
Highest in about 41 years.
Highest since early the Reagan days, right, a long time ago. And Democrats, on the other hand, point to supply chain issues lingering from the COVID pandemic and things like that. So anyway, time will tell.
So as we're filming this, some of the details of the specific settlement will change, but the president has angered some of his strongest supporters this week as he's tried to impose getting back to work, avoiding a strike for railroad workers. Labor unions have been a pretty strong constituency for the president. Why are some of them upset with him now?
This is definitely a situation, kind of a strange bedfellows type of situation, right? I guess it's a common occurrence. The rail companies and rail unions were negotiating a new contract back in the summer and early fall. Biden and his team helped negotiate an agreement between the rail companies and the unions, and they made a big deal about this. It's middle of September. They held a big event in the Rose Garden. Secretary of Labor Marty Walsh was there. One of the top economic advisors, Brian Deese, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. They made a big press conference and a big deal about getting this deal done. Unfortunately for them, since then there are 12 rail unions involved. 4 of the 12 have rejected the deal, and so that's kind of basically collapsed. The good news for Biden is still that it didn't happen until after the midterms that it collapsed. But this is happening. So the way this works is it's kind of complicated, and there's a lot of history behind it. But Congress can now vote to ratify the deal, even though some of the unions rejected it, and could avert a rail strike. If a strike happened, it would happen on December 9th, which would be very, very bad. Almost half of the nation's freight moves by rail, at least partially. That will be a big crippling development to happen right before the holidays. The House has voted on it. Again, we'll see as of this filming, but the Senate is also supposed to vote on it as well, which could avert it. But it's still kind of a black eye. Some of the on Biden calls himself the most pro-union president. He says that in almost every speech. And some of these labor unions are very upset with him, and also upset with the Democrats in Congress who have passed this. And Biden has just kind of said, well, I did the best I can. I got a contract that nobody else could give. That's what he said. And the big sticking point has been sick days. There's no sick days. There's no guaranteed sick days in the contract. And he said, well, I did the best I could on that. And I'll try to get that next time.
Yeah, I mean, apart from the specifics for the railroad workers, there's the principle that a lot of unions don't like of the federal government getting involved and sort of imposing a settlement that isn't accepted necessarily by the union membership in every case, certainly the union leadership in every case.
Well, definitely, and that's kind of what they use as, I guess, a negotiating chip is the power to strike. And but under a bill, it's about a 100-year-old bill that that kind of lays out, how these negotiations are handled between Congress and the federal government and rail unions specifically. Congress can basically override what the unions say in order to avoid a strike, because rail's very important now. 100 years ago, of course, rail was like the king. Rail was everything.
Right.
Because it's so important, Congress has the power to override it. So certainly the unions are upset about that. And again, unions are a big booster to Democrats, a big donor to Democrats. Some of them feel, I guess, sort of stabbed in the back over this.
Mm-hmm. Don't want to derail the holidays.
Yeah, exactly.
So President Biden has been involved in other negotiations apart from the railroad workers. He's had his first state visit, hosted an allied leader. Talk a little bit about who was here and what maybe some of the topics of discussion were between the president and his French counterpart.
French President Emmanuel Macron is visiting Washington, D.C., and there's been a lot of pomp and circumstance and ceremony with this, with it being an official state visit. There was exchange of gifts and official visits and a state dinner that have all taken place. And then, of course, there is some politics as well. They held a joint press conference together. And I talked about some of the various issues. On the positive, I guess, between the two countries, they both talked about how much they support Ukraine against the Russian invasion.
Right.
How they're both supporters of Ukraine and things like that. And of course, France is a strong ally of the United States. There has been one sticking point kind of on the other side, which is that Biden has been pushing like a Buy American kind of thing, which is actually, ironically, a nod to his union ties. That's a nod to unions. So we're going to make things in America. Therefore, we'll have more union-type manufacturing jobs making these kinds of things. But that has upset people like Macron over in Europe because some of this involves giving subsidies to electric vehicles that are made in the United States, but not subsidies to electric vehicles from European countries. So that has upset Macron, and they're kind of talking about working that out, trying to at least.
Biden has said that there are glitches in this bill. Is the Inflation Reduction Act, is the legislation that contained the subsidies for the electric vehicles and some other things, that there's some glitches, and like the paycheck and office space, they can fix the glitch.
Potentially.
Some technical fixes that the president, he didn't specify what he meant, but he said that there were some technical aspects of the bill that could be finessed potentially.
Well, he said that, and we'll see how that works out. But again, he wants to keep union voters he wants to stay in the good graces of union voters. Those are big in Midwestern states that are really key to presidential elections, things like that. So it's going to be very difficult, I feel like, for him to really actually make the unions happy and make the Europeans happy at the same time.
Well, and he's also, there are the voters, obviously, as you mentioned, in the Midwestern states, and what Biden has tried to say is that he's been better for Buy American and better for American manufacturing than former President Donald Trump, who may once again be his opponent in 2024. Definitely.
They both kind of had the same approach. I mean, Trump calls it America First. Biden calls it Buy American, and but the idea is the same: to protect American manufacturing. Tariffs are a part of this, and again, having subsidies for American products that aren't given to other countries' products. The problem with this, of course, as we're seeing with the Europeans here, is that when you do this, the other countries tend to kind of retaliate, and they'll do their own subsidies. They'll have retaliatory tariffs, and it sort of gums up the works of the economy, depending on your outlook of how the economy is supposed to work. So that's going to be an ongoing tension, definitely, between Biden and Macron.
At least they'll always have Paris.
Yes.
Thank you, Haisten. You can read Haisten and the rest of our political team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.